A dream forged in the fires of ambition, a future meticulously built over 4 years of relentless dedication. All came down to a single piece of paper. For Julian Washington, a 22-year-old scholar from the inner city, that paper wasn't just a visa. It was a golden ticket, a passport out of a life of limitations and into the hallowed halls of Oxford University. He stood at the precipice of everything he had ever worked for. But standing between him and his destiny was gate agent Karen Foster, a woman with a chillingly serene smile and a power she was about to misuse in the most devastating way imaginable. What happened in the next 10 minutes would trigger an international incident, ruin a life, and prove that karma, when it finally arrives, doesn't knock politely on the door. It kicks it clean off the hinges. The air in Terminal C of JFK International Airport hummed with a unique blend of stale recycled oxygen, Cinnabon frosting, and human anxiety. It was a symphony of the transient, a place of hellos and goodbyes. But for Julian Washington, it was the final checkpoint, the last boss level before his new life began. He clutched the strap of his worn leather backpack, the one he'd carried through 4 grueling years at Columbia University, its weight a familiar comfort. Inside, nestled within a protective plastic sleeve, was his laptop, his acceptance letter, and the most precious document of all, his passport, containing a freshly minted Tier 4 student visa for the United Kingdom. This wasn't just a trip, it was a coronation. Julian had been born with 2 strikes against him in the eyes of many. He was black and he was poor. Raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse, he'd learned early that the world didn't hand out favors. You had to snatch them. You had to be twice as good to get half as much. So he was. He devoured books while others played games. He aced exams while others slept. His efforts culminated in a full, all-expenses-paid scholarship to study jurisprudence at Oxford University, a feat so monumental it had been the lead story on his local news affiliate. His mother Maria had cried when he showed her the acceptance letter. They were tears of pure, unadulterated pride, a catharsis for all the sacrifices she had made. "You did it, baby," she had whispered, her voice thick with emotion, tracing the Oxford crest with a work-roughened finger. "You're going to a place where kings are made." Now standing in the serpentine queue for Transatlantic Airways, Flight 1004 to London Heathrow, the reality of it was finally sinking in. The cacophony of the airport faded into a dull roar in his ears. He could almost smell the ancient stone of the Bodleian Library, hear the distant chime of college bells. He was no longer just Julian from the Bronx. He was Julian Washington, a future barrister, a scholar on the world stage. He'd done everything by the book. He'd spent months on the visa application, a labyrinthine process of financial disclosures, biometric appointments, and endless forms. He'd triple-checked every document, every date, every signature. When the passport arrived back from the consulate, with the visa vignette gleaming inside, he'd felt a surge of triumph so potent it almost brought him to his knees. It was real. It was happening. The line shuffled forward. He pulled his rolling suitcase, the one his church congregation had chipped in to buy him as a going-away present. He was nearing the front, where 2 gate agents processed the final boarding call. One was a young man, harried but efficient, his movements quick and professional. The other was a woman in her late 40s with a helmet of blonde, heavily hairsprayed hair and a name badge that read Karen Foster. She had a thin, placid smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, which were a pale, assessing blue. Julian watched her interact with the passengers ahead of him. An elderly couple fumbled with their tickets. She sighed with theatrical impatience. A young backpacker with a guitar was told his instrument was too large and would need to be checked, a declaration she made with a hint of satisfaction. She seemed to exude an aura of weary authority, the petty tyrant of her small, carpeted kingdom. Julian felt a faint, irrational prickle of unease, but dismissed it. He was just tired, anxious. He had all his documents. Everything was perfect. Finally, it was his turn. He stepped up to the podium, offering a polite smile. "Good morning." Karen Foster did not return the smile. Her eyes flicked over him from his crisp new blazer to his clean-shaven head, lingering for a moment on his dark skin. "Passport and boarding pass," she said, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. Julian handed them over. She scanned the boarding pass with a flick of her wrist. Beep. Then she opened his passport. She slowly, deliberately turned the pages. She passed his photo page, the entry stamps from a high school trip to Canada, and then she stopped. She had found the visa. She stared at it for a long, silent moment. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. The young agent at the next podium was already waving the next passenger forward. The line behind Julian was growing restless. "Is there a problem?" Julian asked, his voice still calm, though the prickle of unease was now a full-blown alarm bell. Karen Foster looked up from the passport, her pale blue eyes locking onto his. The placid smile returned, but this time it looked predatory. "There might be," she said slowly, her gaze unwavering. "This doesn't look right." "I'm sorry." Julian's mind raced. What could be wrong? He had the confirmation, emails, the official documents from the UK Home Office. He had the DS number from Oxford itself. "I can assure you it's all legitimate. I received it from the British consulate in New York just last month." "That's what they all say," she murmured almost to herself. She ran a manicured fingernail over the edge of the visa vignette, a small holographic sticker that was the key to his entire future. These forgeries are getting better and better. Forgery. The word hit Julian like a physical blow. "Ma'am, that is not a forgery. That is an official government document. You can see the watermark, the biometric chip symbol." "My university." "Your university." She cut him off. Her voice laced with a sudden, sharp venom. The mask of detached professionalism had slipped, revealing something ugly beneath. "It's very easy to print a fake letterhead. We see it all the time. People trying to get into a country they have no business being in." Julian's blood ran cold. This wasn't about procedure. This wasn't about a faulty document. The implication was clear, hanging thick and poisonous in the air between them. "People like you." "Ma'am," Julian said, his voice dropping, becoming firmer. He refused to let this woman, this stranger, unravel him. "My name is Julian Washington. I am a scholarship student at Oxford University. You can call the university. You can call the British consulate. You can look up my name. But you cannot stand there and accuse me of fraud." A man behind him in the line, a businessman in a tailored suit, huffed impatiently. "Can we get this moving?" Karen Foster seemed to draw strength from the man's impatience. She held the passport up, angling it under the harsh fluorescent light, as if she were a seasoned forensics expert. "The edges feel wrong. The font on the W in Washington looks slightly off." She was inventing flaws, creating a reality that suited her narrative. "That's ridiculous," Julian said, his voice rising despite his efforts to control it. Panic was starting to bubble in his chest. "That passport has been through security." It was approved by your own check-in staff an hour ago. And maybe they missed it? Karen snapped, her eyes flashing. Maybe they weren't as diligent as I am. It's my job to protect the integrity of international travel and the security of the United Kingdom. She spoke the words with such self-importance that it was clear she believed them. In her mind, she wasn't a gate agent. She was a sentinel, a guardian, protecting the civilized world from the likes of him. Julian was stunned into silence. He looked past her at the jet bridge, the gateway to his future. He could see the plane, its tail emblazoned with the Transatlantic Airways logo. His seat 24B was waiting for him. Everything was right there, inches away. But this woman was building a wall in front of him, brick by imaginary brick. "There is nothing wrong with my visa," he said, his voice a low, desperate plea. "Please just scan it. Let me board my flight." Karen Foster looked from the visa to his face, a slow, deliberate motion. The chilling smile was back. "I'm sorry," she said, the words dripping with insincerity. "But I can't accept this document. It's clearly fraudulent." And then she did something so shocking, so brazenly destructive, that it seemed to bend the reality of the moment. With a calm, precise movement, she hooked her fingernail under the corner of the visa page, and with a sound like a dry leaf tearing a sound that would echo in Julian's nightmares for years, she began to rip the page out of his passport. The sound was shockingly intimate. A sharp, fibrous rip that cut through the airport's dull roar like a gunshot. For a frozen second, nobody moved. The businessman behind Julian stopped complaining. The young agent at the adjacent podium glanced over, his eyes wide. Julian himself could only stare, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Karen Foster held the torn page between her thumb and forefinger. The visa, his golden ticket, was now a useless scrap of paper severed from the official document that gave it meaning. She hadn't just torn a page. She had amputated his future. She then proceeded with a methodical calmness that was more terrifying than any shouting rage to tear the visa itself into 4 neat, perfect squares. She dropped the pieces onto the podium like confetti at a funeral. There, she said, her voice filled with a chilling finality. "Now it can't be used to deceive anyone else." She slid the mutilated passport back across the counter to him. The book was lighter now, violated. Julian looked down at the confetti of his dreams. The crest of the UK Home Office was bisected. His own name was torn in half. The dam of his composure broke. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and utter disbelief. "You can't do that. That's a federal document. You have no authority." "I have all the authority I need," Karen said, her chin jutting out. She was flush with a sense of righteous power. She had identified a threat and neutralized it. In her world, she was the hero. "I'm revoking your boarding pass. Please step aside. You're holding up the flight." "Holding up the flight." Julian's voice cracked. "You just destroyed my passport, my visa, my entire life is on that plane." He gestured wildly towards the jet bridge. His voice was getting louder now, attracting stares. People were slowing down. Their curiosity piqued by the escalating drama. A few were already discreetly pulling out their phones. The young male agent, whose name tag read Alex, took a hesitant step towards Karen's podium. "Karen, maybe you should call a supervisor. I don't need a supervisor, Alex." She shot back without looking at him. "I've handled the situation. This young man was attempting to travel on fraudulent documents. It's over." "It's not over," Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the counter, the sound making Alex jump. The pieces of his visa fluttered. "You have committed a crime. You've destroyed government property. He was losing it. He knew he was. He was the calm one, the one who always kept his head in a crisis, who debated logically and never raised his voice. But this was different. This wasn't a debate. This was a demolition. Karen Foster remained unmoved. "Sir, if you don't step away from the podium, I will call airport security." The threat hung in the air. Julian knew what that meant. He knew how it would look, a large, agitated black man yelling at a calm, blonde white woman. He knew who the security officers would believe, who they would see as the aggressor. He was trapped. She had not only destroyed his dream, but she had also engineered a situation where his reaction would only serve to justify her actions. Tears of pure, hot frustration pricked at his eyes, and he fought them back fiercely. He would not give her the satisfaction. He backed away from the podium, his legs feeling unsteady. He scooped the 4 torn pieces of his visa into his trembling hand, the edges sharp against his palm. He picked up his mutilated passport. The space where the visa had been was a jagged, ugly wound. He stumbled away from the gate, out of the line, his mind a whirlwind of static. What now? What could he possibly do? His flight was boarding. It would leave in minutes. Even if by some miracle he could prove his case, it would be too late. The door would be closed, the opportunity gone. He sank onto a nearby cluster of hard plastic chairs, the kind designed to discourage comfort. He put his head in his hands, the torn pieces of paper still clutched in his fist. He felt a despair so profound it was physical, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. All those years of work, all his mother's sacrifices, all of it undone in 30 seconds by the casual prejudice of a woman with a name badge and a god complex. Bystanders offered fleeting glances of sympathy or suspicion before moving on with their own journeys. No one intervened. No one wanted to get involved. He was utterly alone. But then, through the fog of his despair, a thought pierced through. It was the voice of his mentor, Dr. Alistair Finch, the Oxford Don, who had championed his application and become a guiding figure over the past year. Dr. Finch, a man who navigated the labyrinthine world of academia and international bureaucracy with effortless grace. A man who had told him in one of their first video calls, "Julian, brilliance like yours makes people uncomfortable." There will always be gatekeepers. The trick is to know which doors to knock on when they slam one in your face. Julian's hand fumbled for his phone. His fingers were clumsy, shaking too hard to properly work the touchscreen. He took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing himself to focus. He found the contact. Dr. A. Finch. It was 10:15 a.m. in New York. That meant it was 3:15 p.m. in the UK. Dr. Finch would likely be in his office, perhaps grading papers or preparing for a lecture. Julian's thumb hovered over the call button. What could he even say? How could he explain this madness? He didn't have another option. He pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He was about to hang up, convinced it was a futile gesture, when the ringing stopped. Dr. Finch's voice was crisp and reassuringly calm, a beacon of sanity in Julian's chaotic world. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Shouldn't you be somewhere over the Atlantic by now?" A sob caught in Julian's throat. "Dr. Finch? Something's happened. I'm at the airport. I'm at JFK. What's wrong? Is the flight delayed?" "No," Julian choked out. "The gate agent. She said my visa was a forgery." There was a moment of stunned silence, on the other end of the line. A what? That's preposterous. It was issued by the Home Office themselves. I saw the confirmation. I told her that. I told her everything Julian said, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. She wouldn't listen. She tore it up, Dr. Finch. She ripped the visa page out of my passport and tore it into pieces. I'm holding the pieces in my hand right now. Another silence, this one longer, heavier. When Dr. Finch spoke again, his voice had changed. The academic warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger that was far more terrifying. What is the name of this airline, Julian Transatlantic Airways, Flight 104? And the gate agent. Did you get her name? Karen Foster. Julian said the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. Stay exactly where you are, Dr. Finch commanded. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone else. I am going to make a series of calls. This is not over, not by a long shot. The line went dead. Julian stared at his phone, a tiny flicker of hope igniting in the vast darkness of his despair. He didn't know what Dr. Finch could do from 3,000 miles away, but the shift in his tone from concern to steel had given him something to cling to. Back at the gate, Karen Foster was basking in the quiet glow of her perceived victory. She had done her duty. She had protected the border. The flight was nearly fully boarded. Her supervisor, Robert Peterson, would probably commend her for her vigilance. Her work phone, a sturdy functional device issued by the airline, buzzed on the counter. The caller ID was a blocked number, but the extension code indicated an external corporate line. She answered with her standard professional greeting. Gate C26. This is Karen. The voice on the other end was clipped British and radiated an authority that made the hairs on her arm stand up. Am I speaking with the Transatlantic Airways gate supervisor for Flight 104 to London Heathrow? It wasn't a supervisor, but the voice was so commanding that Karen instinctively straightened her posture. I am the lead gate agent for this flight. How may I help you? My name is Marcus Thorne. I am the legal counsel for the US-UK Fulbright Commission, and I am calling on behalf of Oxford University. We have just been informed that one of your agents, a Ms. Karen Foster, has illegally destroyed a valid Tier 4 student visa belonging to one of our most prestigious scholars, Mr. Julian Washington. You have approximately 90 seconds to explain to me why your airline has not already involved federal authorities and arrested your employee for the destruction of government property before I place a call to the Deputy Chief of Mission at the US Embassy in London, who is a personal friend. Karen Foster's blood turned to ice. Fulbright Commission, Oxford University, US Embassy. These were not words she dealt with. These were forces from a world far above her station. The placid smile vanished from her face, replaced by a mask of pale, slack-jawed shock. I don't, she stammered. 90 seconds is generous, frankly. The voice on the phone continued, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I am also CCing the head of your airline's North American operations on an email detailing this incident. I expect your supervisor on site to be speaking with Mr. Washington and offering a formal apology within the next 5 minutes. The clock is ticking. The line disconnected, leaving a dial tone buzzing in Karen's ear. She stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Her world, so orderly and controlled just moments ago, had suddenly tilted on its axis and was beginning to spin violently out of control. The silence that followed the phone call was a vacuum sucking all the self-satisfaction out of Karen Foster. Her universe had been reduced to the buzzing dial tone in her ear. Fulbright. embassy, legal counsel. These words were like missiles fired from a distant, powerful place, and they had all landed directly on her podium at gate C26. Her colleague Alex saw the color drain from her face. "Karen, you okay?" She didn't answer. Her mind was a frantic scramble, trying to reassemble the narrative that had just been blown to smithereens. The fraudulent student was a prestigious scholar. Her act of vigilance was the illegal destruction of government property. Her hero complex was crumbling into a terrifying reality. She had made a mistake, a catastrophic, career-ending, possibly life-altering mistake. Her eyes darted around the boarding area and found Julian still sitting hunched over in the hard plastic chairs. He was no longer just some kid trying to pull a fast one. He was a person with connections. Powerful connections that had been activated with terrifying speed. He was on the phone, and the person on the other end of that phone had just carpet-bombed her life. Before she could even process the first shock wave, a second arrived. The internal radio on her belt crackled to life, the voice on the other end sharp and panicked. It was her direct supervisor, Robert Peterson. "Karen, what in God's name is happening at your gate? My boss just called me screaming. He got an email from a lawyer at the Fulbright Commission. Something about you destroying a passport. Get to my office. Now. And hold flight 104. Do not close that door." "Hold the flight," Alex whispered, his eyes like saucers. "We're already 10 minutes behind schedule." Holding an international flight was a cardinal sin in the airline industry. It cost thousands of dollars a minute in fuel crew time and landing slot penalties. It was a decision made only in the most extreme circumstances. Karen realized with a fresh wave of nausea that she was the extreme circumstance. Robert Peterson appeared moments later, a man whose normally placid middle management face was contorted with a mixture of fury and fear. He was a company man, a lifer who prized order and predictability above all else. Karen had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his carefully managed peace. "What did you do?" he hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid a full-blown scene, though it was far too late for that. "Rob, the visa looked fake." Karen began, her voice a weak, reedy version of its usual confident tone. "The protocol is to—" "Protocol," he cut her off, his voice trembling with rage. "Protocol is to call a supervisor. Protocol is to contact the airline's verification service. Protocol is not to take it upon yourself to play judge, jury, and executioner and destroy a legal document. The U.S. Embassy has been contacted. Karen the Embassy." He said the word embassy as if it were a mythical beast that had just appeared in the terminal. In a way it was. It represented a level of trouble he was completely unequipped to handle. He didn't wait for her to respond. He stormed past her, his eyes scanning the waiting area until they landed on Julian. With a deep breath, Robert composed his features into a mask of solemn apology and walked briskly over to the young man. Julian saw him coming, a portly man in a slightly too tight airline uniform, radiating panic. Julian slowly got to his feet, the torn pieces of his visa still cupped in his hand like a broken offering. "Mr. Washington," Robert began, his voice unctuous and drenched in corporate remorse. "My name is Robert Peterson. I am the station manager for Transatlantic Airways here at JFK. On behalf of the entire airline, I want to offer my sincerest, most profound apologies for the unacceptable incident that has just occurred." Julian said nothing. He just stared at the man, his eyes cold and unforgiving. He held up the hand containing the shredded visa. Robert winced as if he'd been slapped. "Yes. That. It It is completely inexcusable. A shocking and gross violation of our policies and, frankly, of basic human decency. The employee in question has been suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Karen, who had been watching from the podium, flinched. Suspended. Just like that. 24 years of service of perfect attendance and positive performance reviews wiped out in a single devastating moment. The investigation will be swift, I assure you, Robert continued, practically babbling. And termination is, well, it's a certainty. But that's our problem, not yours. Our immediate concern is you, Mr. Washington. Your flight is being held. Julian finally spoke, his voice quiet but hard as steel. Held, my visa has been destroyed. I can't travel without it. What good is a held flight? This was the question Robert had been dreading. The damage was done. An apology wasn't a visa. But then Julian's phone buzzed in his other hand. It was a new text message. From Dr. Finch. Julian, I have just spoken with Deputy Chief of Mission O'Malley at the embassy. He is displeased. He has a contact at the Department of Homeland Security at JFK. They are going to meet you. They have the authority to issue an emergency travel waiver directly to the airline contingent on the UK Home Office, faxing confirmation of your visa status, which my office is handling right now. Do exactly as they say. The airline will not dare to defy a DHS directive. Julian read the message, his heart beginning to beat a steady, powerful rhythm. The gears of a great machine were turning a machine far more powerful than Karen Foster, more powerful than Transatlantic Airways. A machine that he, a kid from the Bronx, had somehow managed to set in motion with a single phone call. There's a solution, Julian said, looking up at Robert, a newfound confidence in his voice. I'm expecting to be met by officials from the Department of Homeland Security. They will provide you with the authorization you need to let me fly. Robert's eyes widened even further. Department of Homeland Security. This was escalating into the stratosphere of problems. He was no longer just dealing with an angry passenger. He was caught in the middle of an impending diplomatic incident. Of course, Mr. Washington. Absolutely. We will cooperate in any way necessary, he stammered. Please come with me. We'll get you to our first-class lounge. Get you something to drink. Anything you need. He gestured for Julian to follow him, shooting a final venomous glare back at Karen Foster, who stood frozen by the now empty podium, a ghost at the scene of her own immolation. The passengers still on the plane were growing restless, peering out the windows. The flight crew was on the radio demanding answers. The whole carefully choreographed ballet of air travel had ground to a halt around her. As Julian walked past her, following Robert towards the discreet entrance of the lounge, their eyes met for a fleeting second. He saw no triumph in her face, no lingering righteousness. All he saw was a hollow, dawning terror. The look of someone who has just realized they've picked a fight with an opponent so far out of their league they can't even comprehend the rules of the game. Inside the hushed, sterile quiet of the first-class lounge, Julian was treated like a visiting monarch. Attendants offered him sparkling water, fresh orange juice, gourmet sandwiches he had no appetite for. Robert Peterson hovered nearby, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls from increasingly senior executives. The airline's entire corporate structure was now focused on this one young man, this one torn piece of paper. Less than 20 minutes later, two people arrived. A man and a woman dressed in sharp, plain business suits that screamed federal agent. They introduced themselves calmly and professionally. Mr. Washington, I'm Agent Davies, and this is Agent Carmichael, Department of Homeland Security. We were asked to come and assist with your situation. They were polite, efficient, and exuded an aura of absolute authority. They didn't ask Julian for his story. It was clear they'd already been briefed, likely in excruciating detail. They asked to see his mutilated passport and the torn pieces of his visa. Agent Davies examined them, his face impassive. "Unbelievable," he murmured, shaking his head slightly. He then turned to Robert Peterson, who seemed to shrink in his presence. "Mr. Peterson, we have received electronic confirmation from the UK Home Office via the US Embassy in London. Mr. Washington's visa is valid. His biometrics are in the system. We are issuing a formal parole letter authorizing his travel. Transatlantic Airways will accept this letter in lieu of the physical visa. You will escort him onto Flight 104 immediately. You will find him a seat in your highest class of service as a preliminary gesture of recompense. Is that understood?" "Yes, of course. First class, absolutely," Robert sputtered, nodding vigorously. Agent Carmichael handed Robert a sealed envelope. "This is the letter. It is a federal directive. You will also provide us with the full name and employee number of the agent responsible. There will be a federal investigation into the destruction of government documents." The final nail in Karen Foster's coffin. They turned back to Julian. "Mr. Washington," Agent Davies said, his tone softening slightly. "On behalf of the United States government, I'd like to apologize for what you've experienced today. This should never have happened. We'll have a new passport with a replacement visa couriered to you at your address at Oxford within the week. For now, this will get you where you need to go. Have a safe flight and good luck with your studies." Julian, overwhelmed, could only nod and whisper, "Thank you." Robert Peterson personally escorted Julian out of the lounge and back to gate C26. The remaining passengers in the terminal stared as he was led to the front of the line and onto the jet bridge. As he stepped through the door of the aircraft, the lead flight attendant greeted him with a warm, apologetic smile. "Mr. Washington, welcome aboard. We've put you in 1A. Please let me know if there's anything at all I can get for you." He settled into the plush leather of the first-class seat, a space so large it felt like a small apartment. He had a window all to himself. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, he looked out at the chaos of the tarmac. His journey, which had almost ended in total disaster, was back on track. He thought of Karen Foster. He wondered what was happening to her right now, in some sterile, windowless office, trying to explain the inexplicable. He felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of weary vindication. She had tried to slam a door in his face, but Dr. Finch had been right. All he'd needed was to know which other door to knock on. And that door had been kicked open by the full weight of the US State Department. While Julian was settling into the unexpected luxury of first class soaring somewhere over Newfoundland, the story was taking on a life of its own back on the ground. In the age of social media, a vacuum of information is instantly filled by outrage, and the incident at Gate C26 had been witnessed by dozens of people with smartphones. It started with a single tweet from the businessman who had been standing behind Julian. His name was Arthur Jennings, a sales executive with 3,000 followers. Annoyed by the delay, he had filmed the final ugly moments of the confrontation. The video was shaky shot from a low angle, but it was damning. It clearly showed Karen Foster's face, her name badge, and the shocking moment she tore the visa page from Julian's passport. He tweeted, "Unbelievable scenes at JFK at Transatlantic Air. Gate agent Karen Foster just ripped up a young black man's student visa to Oxford because she thought it was fake. We've been delayed for an hour. This is disgusting. Flying while black transatlantic air." For the first hour, the tweet got a few dozen retweets. Then it was picked up by a well-known activist with millions of followers, and the fire was lit. By the time Julian's flight landed at Heathrow, the video had been viewed over 5 million times. Karen Foster and hashtag Transatlantic Air were the #1 and 2 trending topics on Twitter in the United States and the United Kingdom. The story was everywhere. Major news outlets had picked it up, embedding the tweet and adding their own sensational headlines. Airline agent destroys scholar's visa in shocking video. Flying while black gate agent Karen Foster accused of racist power trip Oxford bound. Student's dream nearly derailed at JFK. Transatlantic Airways was caught in a public relations tsunami. Their social media channels were a dumpster fire of furious comments, threats of boycotts, and demands for Karen Foster to be fired and prosecuted. Their stock price in pre-market trading was already showing a significant dip. The crisis management team assembled in an emergency meeting at their corporate headquarters was in full-blown panic. Their carefully cultivated image of professional, friendly service had been shattered by a 10-second video clip. For Karen Foster, the world had shrunk to the size of a small, grey, windowless interrogation room in the airline's JFK administrative wing. After being suspended by Robert Peterson, she had been told to wait. For hours, she sat there, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to a cold, creeping dread. Her union representative, a tired-looking man named Frank, sat with her, but he offered little comfort. "You didn't call a supervisor, Karen. You didn't use the verification system, you just tore it," he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "It looked wrong, Frank. I've been doing this for 24 years. I have instincts," she pleaded, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Her instincts were now being labeled as bigotry by millions of people. Her personal cell phone, which she'd silenced, was buzzing non-stop in her purse. Friends, family, neighbors. The news was spreading. A junior HR employee finally came in and informed her that due to the unprecedented circumstances and the ongoing investigation, she was being placed on unpaid administrative leave. She was to hand over her airport ID and be escorted from the premises. The walk from the office to the employee parking lot was a walk of shame. Colleagues she had known for decades averted their eyes. Some whispered as she passed. The world she had inhabited for nearly a quarter of a century was casting her out. When she got to her modest sedan, she finally looked at her phone. Hundreds of notifications. She opened her Facebook page and gasped. Her profile picture, a smiling photo of her with her daughter, was being shared everywhere. People were leaving vile, hateful comments. Strangers were posting her home address, her phone number details about her life gleaned from her public profile. She had been doxxed. She felt a surge of terror. Her daughter, Chloe. Chloe was Karen's entire world. A bright, ambitious 19-year-old, Chloe was a student at a local community college, but she had dreams that stretched far beyond their small suburban town. She was a talented artist, and her singular goal was to be accepted into the prestigious Florence Academy of Art for a summer intensive program. It was an incredibly competitive program, one that required not just a portfolio, but also glowing recommendations, and crucially a short-term study visa for Italy. Karen had been helping her with the application for weeks. They had just sent it off the day before. Karen had lectured her endlessly about the importance of dotting every I and crossing every T. "These European schools are very strict, sweetie," she had said. "One little mistake on the paperwork, and they'll toss your application right in the bin. You have to be perfect." The irony was so thick, so suffocating, it made Karen feel physically ill. When she got home, the house was quiet. Chloe was at her part-time job at a coffee shop. Karen walked through the rooms of her small, neat house, a house she was now terrified people would find. She turned on the TV, flipping to a national news channel. And there it was. Her own face a freeze frame from the video next to a handsome, smiling picture of Julian Washington that the media had clearly pulled from his university profile. A brilliant young scholar, the news anchor was saying. A graduate of Columbia University and recipient of the prestigious St. Albans Scholarship to Oxford. His dream was almost cut short by the shocking actions of this gate agent, Karen Foster. The narrative was set in stone. He was the brilliant scholar. She was the racist villain. There was no room for nuance, no space for her 24 years of service, no context for her instincts. The world had rendered its verdict. The phone rang, and the caller ID said Chloe. Karen's hand trembled as she answered. "Mom, are you okay?" Chloe's voice was high with panic. "People are texting me. They're sending me this video." "Mum, what happened? They're saying horrible things." "Is that you? Chloe, honey, it's a misunderstanding," Karen stammered, sinking onto her sofa. "There was a situation at work. It's all being blown out of proportion." "Blown out of proportion?" Chloe cried, her voice breaking. "Mum, they're showing your picture on the news. They're calling you a racist. Someone posted our address in the comments of the video." "What did you do?" Karen couldn't answer. How could she explain that she had simply been doing her job, that she had been protecting the rules? It sounded so flimsy, so pathetic in the face of the hurricane of outrage. She had always seen herself as a guardian of order, a sensible, no-nonsense woman. But seen through the eyes of the world, through the eyes of her own daughter, she was a monster. That night she couldn't sleep. The headlights of every passing car sent a jolt of fear through her. Was it a reporter, an angry protester? Someone coming to do her harm? She sat in the dark, the blue light of the television flickering across her pale face, watching her own character assassination play out on a loop. She saw interviews with Julian's mother, a woman of quiet dignity, expressing her pride and her pain. She saw a statement from Oxford University, condemning the incident and reaffirming their excitement to welcome a scholar of Mr. Washington's caliber. She saw a scathing press release from Transatlantic Airways, throwing her under the bus with such force it was breathtaking. They called her actions a betrayal of our company's core values, and announced they were launching a new diversity and inclusion training program for all 50,000 of their employees, effective immediately. She was no longer just a suspended employee. She was a cautionary tale, a training module, a symbol of everything a company should not be. A few days later, the official letter arrived by courier. Her employment with Transatlantic Airways was terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct. Her pension was under review. Her health insurance would expire at the end of the month. 24 years of her life erased by a signature at the bottom of a page. But the worst was yet to come. The karma that was headed her way was far more specific, far more personal than the loss of a job or public shaming. It was working its way through the slow, grinding gears of international bureaucracy, the very system she had tried to weaponize, and it was heading straight for the person she loved most in the world. Weeks turned into a miserable, isolating month for Karen Foster. The media storm eventually moved on to other outrages, but the damage was permanent. She was a pariah in her own town. Old friends crossed the street to avoid her. She was asked to step down from the neighborhood watch committee she had once chaired. The shame was a constant, suffocating blanket. Her primary focus became Chloe. Her daughter had become withdrawn and angry, embarrassed to even be seen with her. The dream of the Florence summer program was the only light left in their darkened lives. Chloe's portfolio had been accepted, and she had passed the first round of selections. All that remained was the final decision and the visa approval. "It's my only way out of here, Mom," Chloe had said one night, her eyes pleading. "Just for a few months, to be somewhere where nobody knows who Karen Foster's daughter is." The words were a knife in Karen's heart, but she understood. She clung to Chloe's dream as a form of redemption. If Chloe could succeed, if she could achieve her goal, maybe it would prove that Karen hadn't completely poisoned their family's future. Meanwhile, in the hallowed, rain-slicked quads of Oxford, Julian Washington was thriving. The initial trauma of his journey had faded, replaced by the sheer intellectual thrill of his studies. The story of his arrival had made him a minor celebrity on campus, a living symbol of resilience against prejudice. Far from being a hindrance, the incident had opened doors. Professors sought him out. He was invited to speak at a university forum on race and inclusion. Transatlantic Airways, in a desperate act of public penance, had not only compensated Julian financially, but had also announced the creation of the Washington Accords, a multi-million-dollar scholarship fund to help underprivileged American students study in the UK. Julian's name was now attached to an act of institutional good, the polar opposite of what Karen's name had become. The federal investigation into Karen's actions concluded with a stern warning and a hefty fine for the airline. Federal prosecutors declined to press criminal charges against Karen herself, citing the airline's swift termination and remedial actions as sufficient. It seemed her punishment would be confined to unemployment and public disgrace. But the universe, or perhaps just the cold, impersonal logic of consequences, had another plan. One crisp autumn afternoon, Chloe Foster came home from her coffee shop job, her face ashen. She was holding a large, official-looking envelope from the Italian consulate. "It came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Open it, sweetie, open it," Karen said, a frantic hope rising in her chest. This was it. The good news that would finally turn the tide. Chloe carefully tore open the envelope. She pulled out a single sheet of heavy, watermarked paper. She read it, her eyes scanning the lines of formal Italian and English text. Her face fell. The light in her eyes, the one Karen had been so desperate to protect, went out. "No," Chloe breathed. "No, it can't be." She handed the letter to her mother. Karen's hands shook as she took it. She read the final paragraph, her blood running cold. "We regret to inform you that your application for a short-term study visa has been denied. While your artistic portfolio was found to be of exceptional quality, a flag was raised during the routine interagency background check. This flag pertains to a recent high-profile international incident involving a close family member and a partner educational institution in the United Kingdom. Under the cooperative agreements of the Schengen Area Visa Information System, incidents involving the willful destruction of travel documents and the deliberate obstruction of academic travel can be grounds for heightened scrutiny of related applications. Due to the sensitive nature of this flag, we are unable to proceed with your application at this time. The decision is final and cannot be appealed." Karen read the paragraph again, and then a third time. The words swam before her eyes. A high-profile international incident involving a close family member. Willful destruction of travel documents. Obstruction of academic travel. They weren't just talking about her. They were talking about what she did to Julian Washington. The brutal, elegant cruelty of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just been fired. Her name hadn't just been dragged through the mud. Her specific act, the tearing of a student visa, had created a permanent digital stain, a flag in a vast interconnected web of security databases that linked the United States, the United Kingdom, and the entire European Schengen zone. She had weaponized the bureaucracy, and now that same bureaucracy with its long memory and cold logic had turned on her and bitten the one person she loved. It wasn't a person who had made this decision. It was an algorithm, a system, the very system she had claimed to be protecting. "What does this mean?" Chloe asked, her voice a dead, flat whisper. "It's my fault," Karen said, the letter slipping from her fingers and fluttering to the floor. "This is because of me." "Because of what you did to that boy?" Chloe asked, her voice rising with dawning, horrified comprehension. "Yes," Karen whispered. Chloe stared at her mother, and for the first time Karen saw not just anger or embarrassment in her daughter's eyes, but a look of genuine revulsion. "You didn't just ruin your own life, Mom," Chloe said, her voice laced with a bitterness that cut Karen to the bone. "You ruined mine." Chloe turned and ran to her room, the sound of her slamming door echoing through the small house like a judge's gavel. Karen Foster was left alone in the living room, the rejection letter lying at her feet. She had lost her job, her reputation, her friends, and her pride. But that was all manageable. This was not. This was a karmic retribution, so precise, so exquisitely tailored to her transgression, that it felt like a deliberate act of cosmic justice. She had destroyed a young person's dream of studying abroad, and in doing so, she had unknowingly, irrevocably destroyed her own daughter's. The system had balanced its books. The years that followed moved in different directions for the two people whose lives had collided so violently at Gate C-26. For Julian Washington, the trajectory was relentlessly upward. He excelled at Oxford, graduating with first-class honors. The story of his arrival, once a source of trauma, became a foundational part of his identity, a testament to his perseverance. He was a sought-after speaker, a powerful voice on issues of racial justice and systemic inequality. He went on to clerk for a prominent judge at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, his path in international law firmly established. The Washington Accords, the scholarship fund created by Transatlantic Airways, sent dozens of other deserving students across the Atlantic, their paths smoothed by the incident that had almost broken his. He rarely thought of Karen Foster, but when he did, it was with a distant, detached pity. She was a footnote in his story, a catalyst for a future even brighter than the one he had imagined. For Karen Foster, the trajectory was a slow, grinding descent into obscurity and regret. Her relationship with Chloe never fully recovered. Her daughter eventually moved out, taking a series of low-wage jobs, her artistic ambitions crushed under the weight of her mother's actions. The flag on the family name was a specter that haunted any attempt at international travel or opportunity. They were in a very real sense grounded. Karen eventually found work as a stockroom clerk at a big box store, a humbling anonymous job far removed from the authority and prestige she had once enjoyed. She sold her house to cover her mounting debts and moved into a small, nondescript apartment. The blonde helmet-like hair turned grey. The sharp, assessing eyes grew weary. The righteous certainty that had once defined her was replaced by the gnawing, corrosive acid of what if. She sometimes saw the Transatlantic Airways commercials on the break room television with their smiling, diverse flight attendants and slogans about connecting the world. She would feel a phantom limb-like pain, a memory of the uniform she once wore with pride. One evening, years later, she was channel surfing and stumbled upon a news program. The guest, a sharp, articulate, and impossibly confident young man, was speaking about his work with an international human rights organization. It was Julian Washington. He looked older, more mature, but his eyes held the same fierce intelligence she remembered. He was discussing his efforts to help refugees navigate the complex and often discriminatory visa processes of Western nations. A piece of paper, a stamp, should never have the power to extinguish a human being's potential, Julian said, his voice resonating with a conviction born of experience. We have to build systems that are just transparent and immune to the personal biases of those who are meant to administer them. Karen Foster sat on her worn-out sofa and listened to the words washing over her. He had taken the ugliest moment of his life and transformed it into his life's work. He had taken the poison she had handed him and created an antidote for others. In that moment, she finally understood. The karma wasn't the lost job or the public shaming. It wasn't even the ruined dream of her daughter, as painful as that was. The true hard karma was this being forced to live in the world that Julian Washington was now helping to build. A world where people like her had less power. A world where the gates were watched by those with empathy and justice in their hearts. A world where she had become, by her own hand, utterly and completely irrelevant. The universe hadn't just punished her. It had simply moved on without her. And that was the most profound consequence of all. The story of Julian Washington and Karen Foster is a stark reminder that our lives can pivot in a single, breathtaking moment. It's a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit in the face of injustice. But it's also a chilling cautionary tale about the abuse of power, no matter how small. A gate agent's podium, a clerk's desk, a manager's chair. They can all become thrones for petty tyrants if we're not vigilant. Julian's story could have ended in despair at JFK, another forgotten statistic of casual prejudice. But because of a crucial phone call and the strength of his own character, it became a story of triumph and profound, inescapable karma. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the hidden battles people fight every day, please consider giving this video a like and sharing it with your friends. Your engagement helps these important stories reach a wider audience. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into real-life drama, where truth is truly stranger than fiction. Thank you for listening.